Mic check, mic check. Is this thing on? My mic sounds nice. Check one. Party people in the house, what up? It's your man Cliff. Coming at you live. What's going on? We're gonna talk about GraphQL. I put together a project to simulate or to fake a social network. I'm developing a fake social network as part of an experiment, or not really an experiment, but a tutorial or a way to kick the tires on this new GraphQL technology. And I figured I'd share it with y'all. All my people follow me on Twitter, people online visit my blog, whatever. This is the video equivalent of the blog post I posted about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, October 9th, I think I posted it. And this is the video equivalent. So with that, let's get into it. The topic of today is GraphQL, and let's talk about it. So what is GraphQL? Before we have a discussion on what GraphQL is, let's talk about what GraphQL isn't. GraphQL is not a Facebook project or a framework. It is not a replacement for RESTful services. I know a lot of people are out there talking about, oh, REST is going away, GraphQL is taking off, and no, it's not exactly that. You can use this in conjunction to complement your existing RESTful services. For those of you who don't even know what RESTful services is, don't worry about it. We're going to get into all of that, and I'm going to address this topic at a very beginner-friendly level. So GraphQL is not any of that, like I was saying. It's not the thing that's going to replace your current work responsibilities. You're not going to lose your job just because GraphQL came on the scene. Let me tell you what it is, though. GraphQL at its core is a specification. What does that mean? It means it's a set of rules that you would follow to implement or to create a GraphQL implementation. Now you're probably looking and saying, hey Cliff, how is that going to help me? I can't run my website with a set of rules. I can't, do back-end persistence with a, rule book. That doesn't help me. How am I supposed to get excited over this GraphQL stuff, this rule stuff? What are you talking about? Well, let me clarify for you. When I say a specification, it is like I said, a set of rules or principles that people follow to create a GraphQL implementation. That said, there are various implementations out there online that you can download. Everybody from the mama to the papa got one. Facebook, GitHub, Twitter, I don't know, Mom and them, Rollo at the barbershop. They all probably got their own Facebook thing. I mean, not Facebook, their own GraphQL thing going on. And you can go out to the web and download it. And just to show you that I'm not kidding, let's go out to GraphQL. I'm going to do a search for, this is really ghetto. I can't believe I'm doing this. I don't even have my act together. I'm doing this. This is, on the fly. I'm going to try to do this in like 3 takes. This is my second take, so bear with me. I'm not trying to spend a lot of time on this. Again, I'm just putting it out there for y'all to enjoy and, pick up and learn. So GraphQL.org. You can go out to this website and learn about it, of course, by clicking this little learn thing. Look, if you want to learn, click that. Look, I'm learning. It gives you an introduction. It tells you all about the specification and all that. I'm going to try to simplify this for you. Let me see, where do you find the implementations? I think that's under code, community spec, code of content. Like I said, it's a spec. Look at that. You said spec. Working draft. The draft was working since July 2015. Look at all that work. They put in a lot of work, y'all. Look at that work. And now where are we up to? June 2018. This is totally off topic. I'm rambling. Let's get back to the learn part. Let's go to learn and see if we can find the actual implementation. I should know what this stuff is. I really should. This is a terrible example at a tutorial. Here we go. I click code. So you go to code and you have, here it is. So you have various server libraries. These are pieces of code that you can download and run on your computer or on your desktop to function as a GraphQL server. And when you have a GraphQL server running, you can connect your web browser to it and go back and forth. I'm going to get into that in a minute. You also have GraphQL client libraries. Let me see if I can find a client. Let's search for client. Yeah, client libraries should be somewhere. Yeah, here it is. GraphQL clients. Look at that. Look at all these clients, y'all. We got C#, .NET, ClojureScript, Go, Java, Android, JavaScript, Swift, Objective-C, iOS, Python, all kinds of implementations. These are the implementations of GraphQL that you can use. So that's what it is. That's what it isn't. So we talked about what it is, what it isn't. Well, why GraphQL? Why do I need to know GraphQL? Why do I even care? Good question. I like the way you ask questions. GraphQL began its life as an idea at Facebook. You know, some of the engineers there were trying to tackle the tough issue of designing the update to the Facebook mobile app. And they were having various challenges, you know, pushing data to and back and forth across the network, making API requests, you know, changing the backend, setting up new RESTful services, modifying those RESTful services, multiple round trips over the mobile network, which led to latency. It was very cumbersome because they wanted to rapidly prototype this new release of Facebook Mobile, and they didn't want to go through the hassle of, you know, the traditional standing up RESTful services, tweaking them, configuring them, changing them, and so forth, and, you know, the latency involved with the round trips of back and forth over the mobile network. So those engineers came up with the idea of a graph kind of technology, you know, because at the core of Facebook is their graph API. They want to expose the Facebook API in a way that was easy, user-friendly, consumable, malleable, you know, changeable, something you can rapidly prototype against without a lot of hassle on the back end, you know, redeploying servers and, you know, standing up endpoints and so forth. So that's kind of what GraphQL is intended to address, the need for being able to rapidly prototype your application. I'm going to close this window, by the way, while I'm talking. Being able to rapidly prototype your application. Ignore my get ignore. That was a little bit of a pun there. Ignore, get ignore, whatever. They want to be able to rapidly prototype against a backend, you know, be able to push data back and forth, make API or program calls, remote program calls, which is what we refer to when we use RPCs, like remote procedure call. They want to make calls from the web browser or from the mobile application on their Facebook servers, which are on the other side of the internet. They want to make these calls remotely, and they want to change the way they were calling these programs running on the internet. Follow me? And they didn't want to do a lot of legwork. So that's why we use GraphQL, because it removes some of that legwork for deploying and prototyping and changing your mind. GraphQL allows you to make a lot of mind changes. You know, I changed my mind. I don't want it this way. I want it that way. Oh, no, I want to do this. So that's pretty much what GraphQL does. So we said what it is, what it isn't, why GraphQL, how do I GraphQL? Okay, let's cover the how. For that part, now that I've done a bunch of blabbing, I haven't shown you guys much of anything other than a web page that anybody could have went out to. I'm going to start, how do I pronounce that? I'm going to start by opening up this project. Don't worry too much about what's in here. If you're brand new to coding, newbie, whatever, I'm going to explain all of this piece by piece in a beginner-friendly way, hopefully. That doesn't lose you guys. And try to keep it interesting for people who do have a little bit of experience. So it's kind of a challenge for me to explain for various different crowds, because I never know who's visiting me or looking at my nonsense that I post online. So this is Intellij Idea. It is a Java development environment, an IDE for those of you who are brand new to programming. It is a software package that you use to write software. And what I've done, and I'm just going to quickly go through this, I've created a run config. I've actually checked out this project. I have this project online. It's on my GitHub. It's called Facebox GQL. It looks very basic right now, but I've checked out this project or cloned it to my desktop. It is here on my desktop under Idea Projects. Yes, here it is. So it's here. I did a git clone in this folder, and it created that folder, which spit out all this stuff that you see. Everything but this node modules. That wasn't there. That was like so missing, so invisible. So we get rid of that, and you'll see that node modules folder here should eventually go away too. Yeah. So I'm going to actually show you what all this does. So I'm going to run a terminal. I've opened up a terminal. This is a command line prompt I can use from within my IDE, my programming environment. I'm going to run a special npm install command after I've checked out or cloned this project. And what npm install will do is it will go out to the internet and download a bunch of JavaScript packages. These are dependencies. When you're developing a program, nobody writes programs from scratch these days. You usually use a set of packages, different functions that you would call from different JavaScript developers. Everybody has their own take on, or their own package they use to address a certain need. So we're going to use a couple packages for starting a web server. We're going to use some, what is this again? GraphQL. Yeah, we're going to use some GraphQL packages, which represent or which implement or, actually they are the APIs that we will call, the functions that we're going to call, and we're going to download them. I've already included them in this project, and I'm just going to work through this backwards. On my blog, I kind of explained it from top to bottom, but in this video tutorial, I'm going to kind of do it the opposite direction. We'll just see which one works better. So I'll run npm install, and that's going to spit out a bunch of random text. And what's happening here is a bunch of downloading is happening. npm is a program that downloads and manages JavaScript dependencies. So it's building a folder structure, which is called node modules. That's where all of these dependencies will live. And it's downloading all these packages that my GraphQL server will use when it runs. And you see it's finished. We have all these warnings. I'm going to ignore the warnings right now because that's not critical to what we're trying to do. I'll clear my screen. Oh, I hit the wrong combination here. I keep hitting the wrong combination. I want to get into my terminal. There we go. Clear my screen. And now everything should be set to run. In the beginning, when you download this project and open it up in Intellij or WebStorm, you won't have this. If you're using a different IDE like VS Code, feel free to do that. I'm going to get rid of this just to show you how all of this comes together. So I'm going to we'll add a new configuration by clicking. Well, I went kind of fast, didn't I? We click this little window here, which is the Edit Run Debug Configurations dialog. We're going to click this. It opens a dialog window, and this little plus button lets you add a run configuration. A run configuration is a set of rules that we use to run different pieces of our program. So I'm going to create an npm run configuration, and I'm going to use this run configuration to start my server. And to do that, you have to point npm to your package.json. Package.json is like the core file behind any JavaScript project. When you get into JavaScript development, it'll start to become more familiar. So we find our package.json file. And the command we want to use is start. I have already implemented the start command in this package.json, and we'll walk through that momentarily. I'm going to select a node interpreter, version 8.16.2. I know there's probably a later one out there, but that's not important right now. I think that's all I need to do. Node options. If I hit apply, I should be good. Now I have a run configuration called start. We can start that, and start will run a bunch of commands from the command line in the background, and it shows you the commands that it's running, and eventually spit out some text, and you'll see this text here that says running server on localhost GraphQL, localhost :8090/GraphQL. This is the URL that we will use. I'm going to copy that and paste it into my browser window here. Let me open the browser window and drag it over. And we'll paste that URL here, and you'll see, voila, look at this. We have a GraphQL server. So what is GraphQL from the front end? That's what we're going to discuss right now. This part of the tutorial will focus on what GraphQL would look like to a front-end engineer, somebody who wants to use it. So now what I've done so far, just go slowly, I've cloned my GraphQL Facebox GQL project from GitHub. I skipped that step. I'm not putting it in the video. I cloned that. I opened this project up in Intellij. I've created a run configuration to launch it, and it's running. Actually, that's not fair. Let me do this a slightly different way. I'm going to stop this because that's the Intellij way. I'm going to do this hardcore. A lot of you out there are probably using something like Atom or VS Code. Let's go to VS Code. We'll do that. How about that, right? I'm going to try to be hardcore here. My comfort level is Intellij, but we're going to go and open this same project. Where was it? It's under my idea projects. Yeah, look, I'm running VS Code. I'm opening an idea project. Look at that. How cool is that? All right. Same thing. So now I've opened a project in VS Code. VS Code is a different program editor. This is something you can get for free. Intellij Idea is also free, but only the Java part is free. We're doing JavaScript and Node.js server-side stuff. So the Intellij version that you get for free online is not really good for that. If you pay, what is it, like $99 for the Ultimate Edition, which I suggest if you're serious about programming, you get all the bells and whistles of doing WebStorm, Java, server-side, whatever. It's the full package. But I don't want to do this tutorial using Intellij for people who don't have that in their budget. So for that, let's see, what is the shortcut for opening my terminal? So I'm going to open my terminal here. And the same thing I did in Intellij, I actually stopped my server. So if I refresh the screen here, you'll see, oh no, site can't be reached. I don't have anything here. So we're going to go back to our project in VS Code. And the same thing, except instead of using a run configuration, I've opened up my command terminal. How did I do that? I did a control tilde, but there's a command in here. Let me see. Switch to command, click. How do you open a command prompt? There's an option somewhere in the menu. I'm a keyboard driven kind of guy. Terminal. Yeah, this right here. You see this? It shows you the keyboard hotkeys you can use to open the terminal, but I'm going to try to do this in a way that most people new to program will do. So you would, if you were following this for the first time, you would do pretty much what I explained earlier. You would, well, I didn't explain everything, but you would clone the project, and then you would open it in your VS Code editor, and then you would go to New Terminal, which will open up a command prompt where you can type commands in. And I'm going to type in the very special npm start command, and that, well, actually, in the beginning, what you would do is type npm install, like I did in Intellij, and that, of course, goes out to the web, downloads all your dependencies, and installs them in this project. And then I'm going to clear the screen, and I'll run the npm start command, and that's how we start our server. I did a lot of talking, I wasted a lot of time there, but okay, so now, going back to our web browser, server is started. I refresh the screen. Look, graphical. GraphQL is the user-friendly interface that I've enabled in this backend server project that allows you to explore an existing GraphQL API. So what I've done here so far is not very impressive. I've implemented a GraphQL server with a single API call, and you can click the docs button over here, and that opens up your Documentation Explorer. And the Documentation Explorer lets you explore all of the different types of API calls that you can make. So, like I was saying, at its heart, GraphQL is a implementation, but the server side of the implementation, at the heart, GraphQL is a spec with various implementations, and this one implementation that we have allows you to expose or to make accessible any API that you have running on a computer, which typically would be in a data center online. You know, if you had your own website, your own AWS, EC2 cloud, you can upload web servers to the cloud, Google Cloud, Azure, or whatever, and host your web server. These cloud companies, they offer virtual computers that you can run software on. So I'm going to kind of try to walk through that as well. I don't know if I'm going to explain the intricacies of deploying something to the cloud, but we're going to pretend that my local iMac here that I'm running on, oh, not iMac, this is a Mac Mini. My local Mac Mini is a cloud computer, so they local computer that I'm running this on, localhost. I'm hosting this server locally on port 8090, is exposing a query API, something I can actually ask questions of. So if I click on this query, I can actually drill in to see what kind of queries I can make. Queries mean I can ask questions. I can pull information or data back from my API. So I have, under this schema, under this query schema, schema is like a description or a structure. I have one type of query I can make, which is a hello, hello query. And hello takes one, returns one type. It returns a string. So I can actually use this API. This is the API that we're talking about. I can use this API by calling it from here. So this is a code window where you can type various GraphQL statements, and it opens up with an explanation. It tells you, hey, welcome to Graphical. It's an in-browser tool for doing cool stuff. GraphQL queries typically start with this opening curly brace character. Lines that start with this hash or pound sign are ignored. So all these lines, if I were to run this right now, nothing happens because, well, actually something does happen. Look at that, syntax error. What kind of, this is an important step too. It's always good to create damage to break things so you can understand what goes wrong before you understand what goes right. So I ran this without typing anything, and it says, hey, syntax error, unexpected EOF. What is EOF? I got an unexpected EOF. EOF stands for end of file. So what it's really telling us, this error message is saying the syntax, the programming syntax that we're trying to run isn't right. There's an error here. It hit the end of the file at line 32. You see this, line 32, column 1 here. I must have something on my desk here. It's closing, the scraping sound. Column 1, at this point, that's the end of the file. That's the end of this text. And it's actually expecting some GraphQL statements, and we haven't given it any. So this whole block of text is a series of comments. They all start with a hash or pound sign, which means they are ignored. The GraphQL interpreter will not read any of these lines. Anything that starts with pound sign, it won't get read. So these are like documentation lines. They tell you how to use or how to type GraphQL syntax. So let me show you, actually, instead of babbling. You'll start with a, query? Yeah, and you get autocomplete. As soon as I start typing Q, look what happened. I can, either do query or an open brace. It says, use one of these. So you can start your queries with either the word query or with an open brace. I'm going to do an open brace. Actually, no, we'll do query. We'll do it the formal way. Query, and then you start with open braces. So this is at the root, going back to our documentation explorer here. At the root, wait a minute, I went back. At the root type, the very bottommost thing, the first thing that you write to interact with your API is the word query. And it says right here, query. What is that? It's a query type. We'll talk about types in a minute, but this type has specific fields. So inside of this query, you can consider this as an object. These braces, open and close curly braces, you can kind of think of it as an object. So we have to describe the fields inside this object. We have one field that's allowed, which is hello. Now I can hit Control Space and get autocomplete, and it will pretty much show me what kind of, it'll write the query for me. I don't even have to write the query. That's how cool this is. So now I've written my first GraphQL query. I'm interacting with the hello API, which I've created in the JavaScript project. I'm going to click Run to execute the query. And look at that. It returns. So this is the query. This is what I asked for. This is me as a front-end developer, JavaScript developer. I would put this in my JavaScript, and I would pass this information over to my GraphQL server, and it would respond with this. So this is the response I'm getting from my query. I get data back. Is it data or data? I get a data object with a hello field and the text hello is Facebox. So that's pretty much how the GraphQL or graphical client works. There's a lot more in here. I can click this button to get a history of all the queries I've typed. If I want to type another query without the word query and run that, you see that's here, and I can click any one of these to go back in history and rerun. I can run this query again, or I can run that query. They're both doing the same thing. It's just an example of different ways you can type your query. Every time you run a query, it appears in your history. And you can mark these as favorites. If I had a couple of, a bunch of queries in here, and some of them were very complicated, I can favorite some of them so they, are easy to find, whatever. So let's get back to the code. That's how I would use it. So, oh, wait a minute. Before I get to the back end code, let's talk about the front end again. So this here is a GraphQL statement, which is asking or interacting. It's asking to run or asking to retrieve a hello object. That's what we're pretty much asking. Query means question. We're asking within the context of a query, we're asking for a hello object. And our server returns an object under the data field. Always return a JSON-like structure with the text, with the data attribute mapped to or connected to an object. So this object has one hello field. It has a hello object in it. Well, hello is not really an object. As you drill into your schema, of course, you see hello is a string. And if I were a JavaScript developer, I would use this API by creating this. I would create a string that had this text, and I would pass this string. I would actually post this to my GraphQL endpoint, and I'll show you how that works a little bit later in a later tutorial. But this is how you would interact with it. How did all this come to fruition? Well, let's talk about web servers. So what I did in the beginning, when I was doing a bunch of rambling, I launched a server. The server is running a command which takes this index.js file and runs it. I'm running this index.js file under my node interpreter. I'm actually using Babel. Babel kind of transforms one form of JavaScript into a different form of JavaScript. And in this case, I'm using Babel so I can use some of the later ES6 JavaScript features. That's pretty much what you would use Babel for. Take advantage of the latest syntax, because different JavaScript environments will not support all of the latest features. It just so happens I'm running Node 8, and a lot of those features are available, but just for the sake of argument, let's just, to explain that Babel will kind of transform or it'll read in this index.js file and convert it into a different syntax, and then run it in our node environment. So this index file is our web server. And at the beginning, what do we have? We are importing three components, three packages. The packages that we imported are defined in our package JSON. So at the beginning, what we would have done, and I explained all of this in my tutorial blog entry. In the beginning, what you would do is you would install each one of these dependencies. You would do an npm install on the command line and install Express. You would install Express GraphQL, and you would install GraphQL itself. Those are the three most minimal packages for implementing a GraphQL server using Express on Node.js. It's a whole lot to say there, but that's what we're doing. We're using these three packages along with, there's some dev dependencies, but I would run this command to install these three packages first, and it would install them as dependencies in my package JSON after it finishes updating. And you can run that command as much as you want. It's not going to change anything because these are already installed. It's just over installing and seeing, oh, I already got it. So I'm just running through and showing you how I came to this conclusion or came to this point. And then I want to install these dev dependencies. I would install Babel CLI, go back to my command line, npm install Babel CLI. I would install Babel preset env, and I would install Babel preset stage 0, and I would also install Nodemon. And Nodemon is a monitoring package. It looks at every file that we have in this folder and looks for any changes. Whenever a file changes, it will stop and rerun a command. So, and I want to install these as developer packages, so I would pass an additional flag that's called save dev, and that would save these dependencies as developer dependencies. The difference between a developer dependency and a regular dependency is developer dependencies are things that you only use when you're in development. As I'm writing the code, as I'm testing the code, as I'm refining the code, I'm using developer dependencies to do that. After I finish with my project and I'm ready to ship it, I'm ready to deploy it, put this online as a publicly accessible web server, these components would not go with it. And oh, look at that, I have some updates. I have updates. I feel silly. Oh, package. I'll talk about that later, or maybe I won't. That's not important. I've modified my node monitor. This has been updated apparently. I was using one version, now I'm using a different version. It was at version 1.19.3, and I guess lately they've released 1.19.4. That's an irrelevant detail. But you can see every time I run these commands, it will download the latest version of these dependencies. So I've installed all of these dependencies as developer dependencies. Again, these do not ship with my package, with my application. This whole package here is a server-side package. This is something that would be deployed as a web server, web service that would sit online. I would deploy this to Azure or to AWS, EC2, or to Google Cloud, or to whatever hosting provider I had a contract with. I would build this project as a package and I would deploy it online, and then you would be able to, on your web browser, browse this web server. So instead of deploying it, I'm going to run it. I'm using these packages to run stuff locally. Again, these developer packages let me run things locally, and these other dependencies, these other packages, are things that would ship, or they would be included with the deployed web application. So that's the gist of what this file is. It's describing our dependencies. It's describing the author. Oh, look at this. My name's not in here. Cliffy. And then it describes a couple of commands that you can use from NPM to do various things. So I have two commands defined. A test command, which will run this on the command line. Echo. There is no test. I don't have any tests. I'm not going to worry about that. But I also have a start command. The start command runs the Nodemon or node monitor command, which comes out of this package that I installed, and it passes the index.js file to it, and it asks node monitor to run this Babel node command on the JavaScript file that I'm giving it. And it will continue to run this command anytime it sees any changes to this file. So as I'm making changes to my index.js file, it will stop the server and then restart the server, which would, going back to my package.json, would restart the server, which would reconvert and reprocess the changes. It would take these changes and compile them and make them available. So I don't have to manually keep coming down here and stopping my server and running the server every time I make a change. So that's the gist of the package.json. The package.json is the first file that we would have in our project. It defines all of our dependencies, defines our author, whichever license that we're using. Open source software has various licenses. I'm not going to describe that. It describes our main file, the name of our project, version. You can put in a description. This is an example of a fake social network. And that's the purpose of your package.json file. And then you use this from the npm command line tool to do various things. So I can run npm start or I've actually ran npm start, haven't I? I have it running over here. No, I don't have it running over here. Here it is. Yeah, so this little drop down window here allows me to switch between different terminals. I have 3 terminals open. I didn't realize I had 3 terminals open. I can go to the first one. This is a terminal sitting in in this folder here. I'm under my users Clifton Craig Idea Projects Facebox GQL folder, and I could find that in my Finder. If I go to that same path, wrong sequence. If I go to users Clifton Craig, what is Idea Projects? Put a different thing there. Idea Projects. You would see that there's my users Clifton Craig Idea Project. This is the folder I'm in. So I'm in that folder, and I'm able to run commands. But I don't want this command here. Why am I even talking about that? Let's exit out of that. This is the terminal session that I have running the server. I ran npm start. I ran it from here. So I'm going to type Control-C to stop the server. I'm going to type Command-K to clear my screen. And I'm going to type npm start again, which will, npm will read in this package JSON. It will look for the start command on the script. It looks for the script section and looks for the start command, and it runs this. That's all the npm start is doing. It's actually reading this file, parsing it, and pulling this text out, running. I could literally run this on the command line instead of running npm start, and I would get the same effect. Let's do that. I'll paste that to the command line and run nodemon index.js, and you see it's doing the same thing. The package JSON just gives us a more friendly way, or more easier to remember way of running complicated commands. So once I figure out how to start the server, I don't have to keep typing all of this. I could just run npm start, and it would run all that text. It would execute all that text for me. So that's the package JSON. That's our dependencies. So let's talk about the actual index script again. I feel like I bounce back and forth between this. So we go back to the index.js, and like I said, we start by importing 3 dependencies. Express from, so I'm importing an Express object from the Express package that I installed. I'm importing a GraphQL HTTP object from the Express GraphQL package, and here I'm importing schema from my local schema folder. What is under my local schema folder? Oh, I'm sorry, not local schema, my local schema file. So you see this / means local folder, the current folder that we're sitting in. It's going to look for the schema .js file in here. So it's actually reading, this line of code is including this file inside of my index file. So it's like, it's if I typed everything from here at this point. And that's pretty much what each one of these imports do. They import or suck in the contents of those packages. And I'm not going to go into the details of those packages, but that's what's happening here. So we start our first GraphQL server with these 3 import statements. We define a port number, which is 8090, and the port number is what we used when we typed in the URL to this address. When we start the server, we are starting the server on port 8090. Believe it or not, every place you go online has a port. If I want to go to if I want to go to msn.com, for example, msn.com listens on port 443. That 443 disappeared because the web browser understands that that's the default. That's the port that all web servers listen on. So you don't have to actually type that. But in our development environment, we are using a different port, a non-standard port. You can actually have a web server listen on any port. A port is just a number. So I can have thousands of web servers running on my Mac right now, all listening on a different port. And I can connect to different web servers by controlling a different port. I can have web server on port 3000. Right now I don't, but if I did that, I would, it would come up here. But right now I just have the one that I'm running, so that's what the port is for. And then I use the express function that I imported from the express package, and I create an app object. You can go out to express.com, expressjs.com, to figure out how to use Express. They have documentation on their API as well. I'm just going to briefly go over how I'm using the app object to start up my first web server. So we call it Express function, which returns an app, and then from this app object we can call a get function. And what the get function does is it takes a path, a context path, and it connects this context path to a function. What that means is anytime your web browser tries to get anything at this path right here, slash, it's going to run this function, which takes, this is an ES6 function, by the way. It takes two parameters, request and response, and then this is the function body here. So it would, anytime your web browser tries to get anything from the root, this special / is considered the root path. If I were to use my web browser and go to the root path, you would see the result of running this function. It's going to run this function, which would take two parameters, a request and a response, and it would ask the response object to send this text. GraphQL is amazing. So if I go there, you'll see GraphQL is amazing. And I can change this to say GraphQL is implemented by Cliff. If I can spell it correctly, implemented by Cliff. And I'll save it, and you see stuff down here, text down here is going and saying, oh, I stopped, I'm restarting the server because I saw some stuff happen here, and now I can go back to my web browser, I can refresh, and it says, oh, look, I got my new text. That's pretty much how this is a web server. These few lines of code give us a web server. Now, what else did I include in this web server? I included two special objects, the GraphQL HTTP from the Express GraphQL package, and I included the schema that I defined locally to create a GraphQL instance. See, I don't have to actually create GraphQL from scratch. It's been written by a bunch of people who are way smarter than me, and I just imported. I installed their package locally on my computer, and I've imported those components into my file here, and I can use them as if I wrote them myself. And so for the next block of code here, we have this GraphQL. I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but we have this GraphQL. We have this app use function. So now we're telling the application object to use the result of this function. I'm calling a special GraphQL HTTP function, which returns a special object that I don't need to know about. It just does stuff. It does magic for me, and it returns this object as a parameter to this use function. So I'm passing the result of this GraphQL function and telling my Express app to use GraphQL HTTP whenever my browser asks for the GraphQL path. So earlier, what you saw me do was type in /GraphQL, and it's using the GraphQL HTTP package. And the GraphQL HTTP package is actually asking for an object. So I'm giving GraphQL HTTP my schema that I've imported, and I'm giving it a root object, which I'm defining up here, and I'm also telling it to open up GraphIQL. GraphIQL is the interactive GraphQL Explorer. That's this interface. So all this code has been implemented by people smarter than me, and it knows to open this interface whenever my browser asks for GraphQL off of the application object, off of the Express object. So Express is listening to these two paths, and if I get the root path, it will return this silly text here. If I try to access the GraphQL path, I get the Graphical Explorer that renders my API. So my API is defined by these two objects. So let's talk about the things that make up a server-side GraphQL API. Well, what is a server-side GraphQL API? Server-side GraphQL API is any work that you want to do on behalf of an application. If I was writing an iPhone app or an Android app and I wanted to count the number of tweets that I got over time, I could write some JavaScript code that called in that ran some Twitter functions that called into the Twitter API and said, hey, count the tweets that I have on my user account and return them as a number. And that would be the work that I wanted to do on the server. And then I would expose that work in the form of a object, and that object is defined by a schema. And if it sounds like I'm making this up, I'm literally thinking through the stuff as I'm talking. So let's go to the schema. The schema is the thing that I imported here. So I've defined a schema file. Schema.js is right here. And inside schema.js, the first thing I do is I import build schema, which is a very special function that I'm importing from GraphQL. It's another one of the packages that I installed from the command line. Which one was it here? Was it this one? Yeah, when I ran this, when I installed these three dependencies, you see GraphQL was one of the main ones I imported. So now we have this build schema function that I'm asking for. I'm asking it from the GraphQL package. And then I call this function and I pass it a GraphQL schema. A GraphQL schema is basically a definition of a type. So GraphQL is made up of types. These types can be queries or they can be mutations at the bare minimum. We'll talk about mutations later, but let's just focus on queries. Queries are ways that you would want to ask for information from your API. So in this case, I'm defining an API which returns a string. The name of that API is hello. So I can make hello queries from the internet, from any client. It doesn't have to be just a web browser. It could be a mobile application, an iPhone app, an Android app, a desktop app, React, Angular, whatever. This is technology agnostic. As long as I can make an HTTP connection, a web connection to this GraphQL instance, I can run these queries. I can pass this text over to the server and the server will respond. Well, how does it respond? Well, while we're defining the types of objects that are available, and once you define them, once I've built a schema, the schema is what defines the types of objects that are available. So once I've defined this schema, I'm exporting this schema to the rest of my code, and that's what allows me to import. So in the schema.js file, I export schema. In my index.js file, I import schema from that file. And now I'm passing that schema to the GraphQL HTTP client right here. It's the first parameter. The second parameter is this root object. What is the root object? Well, right here I have a function. This is an ES6 function. If you're not familiar with ES6 syntax, let me just go over that real quick right now. So in ES6, we have these things called functions. It's like an anonymous function. And what this is, this is an object. I'm not explaining this correctly. This is an object. These braces define an object. This is a JavaScript object notation, JSON kind of thing. So I'm creating a JavaScript object which has one field called hello, and that hello field is defined as a function. This right here is the function. I was moving a little fast here. So the root object, the root variable is an object that has one field. So our root object matches, if you pay attention, our schema. Our schema has one type, which is hello. And the root object says whenever you get a query for hello, we're going to run this function. So it's very important that our query resolvers, this is what we call a query resolver. It's the actual code that runs when GraphQL sees a query. So what happens is when you pass the GraphQL query text from one side of the internet, this could be your web browser, this could be your Android or Apple iOS phone, when you pass this text over, this text here, when you pass this over to GraphQL, GraphQL will get that text here, and it will pass it to the GraphQL HTTP function, and that function uses the schema and your root resolver, and it will try to match the query that we're asking for here with the schema. And the schema says oh yeah, I do have a hello. So we've defined a hello API, and the resolver, the way that we resolve those queries is defined by your query resolver. So I have this root object which resolves my queries using the hello field. So this field has to match what's in the schema. And anytime we pass a GraphQL string, query string with a hello object, it will run this function. And this function will return this text, hello space box. And that's what you see here in the browser. When I run this, we get hello space box. I could just as easily design a different kind of API. I can return the Cliff API and create a different function that returns a string that says, what do I want it to say? Hello, it's Cliff. That's very creative. I'm usually a little bit more creative than that. We have an error here, don't we? Why is this an error? It's an error because I need a comma here. Again, this is JSON syntax right here. So to make this a proper JSON object, I need a comma here. So I'm putting a comma here. We have now two fields. We have a hello field, and we have a Cliff field. So our query resolver can now resolve, our query resolver can now resolve two kinds of queries. We can resolve the hello query, and we can resolve the Cliff query. So let's try to ask for the Cliff query. And I am intentionally, for those of you who are astute, I am intentionally doing things the wrong way here. If I were to just ask for the Cliff API now, what do you think is going to happen? Well, right now, you automatically see stuff is wrong. It says, cannot query field Cliff on type query. Why do I have this big red X? Why is that a problem? Well, let's actually click. We're going to do what most people do and ignore errors, because errors are scary. We don't want to deal with them early on. Oh, look at that. Errors. Message, cannot query field Cliff on type query. Look at that. Line 2, column 3. Where is line 2? Line 2, column 3. 1, 2, 3. Look at that. We started with an error here. It's saying I can't query this field Cliff on type query. Why can't we query this? Anybody want to raise your hand and explain to me why you can't query Cliff? I'll wait. No, that's not it. Somebody else? You in the back. I'll tell you why. It's because we've defined the way to resolve the query, but we haven't actually included that in our schema. So for that query to be available, see, GraphQL doesn't know about any types that are not defined in the schema. Remember, I said I was giving the schema to the GraphQL HTTP client. This is the thing that actually implements or runs GraphQL in the background for us. And it's using our schema. And our schema was imported from schema.js. And you see in schema.js, do you see Cliff here? No, I don't see a Cliff here. So why don't we add one? Let's just do Cliff, and he is a type string. So now we do that, we'll look at our node server. You see that it's restarting again. We'll refresh our page because now we've updated the server. Let's refresh. Look at that, it automatically ran. See, that went too fast. I actually wanted to walk through the fact that if I type C, now you can see it's autocomplete. I can hit Control Space, and autocomplete will show me which types are available. I can now interact with the Cliff object or Cliff API. And if I wasn't too certain, if I was not comfortable with all this hotkey stuff, I'm a mouse guy. I don't want a hotkey. I can't remember all those sequences. That's weird. I want to use my mouse. So I drag my mouse all the way over to root types and say, oh, what kind of types are available as queries? Click on that, and look, we have two things that are available now. The Cliff and the hello object. So let's create one more type of query. Let's create an age query. And this will be a type of integer. I think that's the type, right? Is it integer? I have to look online. Look, it's okay when you don't know how to do stuff, because when you don't know how to do stuff, we can go back here and refresh and it'll tell us how stupid we are. Look at that. App crash, waiting for file before starting. Look at this. Unknown type integer. So it's throwing a new error. Look, it's already telling us what's wrong here, but I'm just going to go through and see what happened. We broke stuff. I like breaking stuff. Throw new error, map, function. Looks very scary, right? Well, let's just look at what it says. Error, unknown type integer. We tried to define a query type, which is called age, and it was of type integer. Well, guess what? It doesn't seem like GraphQL supports integers. Let's see what it does support. GraphQL.org, is it? Ooh, I forgot the name of it. Yeah, GraphQL.org. So you go here, and we want to learn about the different types, don't we? We want to learn about queries and mutations. You can go here. We want to learn about variables, operations, it tells you everything. Let's just go to fields. I believe that's where it is. One of these has, I'm going very fast. One of these, I'm just scrolling through. I said fields, and I'm going and scrolling. I'm actually looking for the types. Variables. There's a section in here. I forget where it is. There's a section where it defines types. Let's go back to the top. Queries, mutations, type system. I'm sorry, here it is, type system. Yeah, we're under schemas and types. And when you define a type in your schema, it tells you these are different. This is a type language, so these are types of things that you can define in your schema. You can define a character, you can define name, string with an exclamation point, all kinds of stuff. There are native types though, scalar types. Yeah, right here. This is what I'm looking for. So the types can also be an int. I typed integer here. You see what I did, which was wrong, integer. But it doesn't support integer, but it does support an int, a float, string, boolean, ID. These are all the different types that you can define in your schema. So I'm going to define an int, not an integer, but an int. I'll save that, and I'm going to go to my node server on the command line. It crashed. Oh, it's still running, isn't it? I'm wondering, I'm going to stop this because we had a hard error. Anytime I see a hard error like this, it gives me concern. So I'm going to type Control-C to stop the server. I'll clear the screen by typing Command K. Now I'll hit the up arrow to recall my last command and hit enter to run that last command, which was npm start. And now, looks like it's okay. Running server on localhost. We'll go back to our localhost tab. And we'll just go back to GraphQL path. Hit the wrong button here. And now let's look and see what kinds of queries we can create, we can ask for. Look, we can ask for an age. And it returns a type int. So let's do that. It will, wait a minute, it will autocomplete age. What do you think is going to happen if I run this? Wrong. Guess again. Yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen. That dude in the back there, yes. Yeah, he finally woke up. It's going to give us null. What is a null? Null is the absence of a value. So why is it giving us null? Anybody want to guess? Well, it's because we defined in our schema an age of type int. But guess what? Guess what we didn't do? We didn't resolve that. There's no way that GraphQL knows how to resolve that. So when an age query comes in, it doesn't know what to do. What age? What's an age? How do we resolve age? So let's add to our root resolver. This is the thing that resolves all of our queries. We'll add one more field called age. And because it returns a type int, we're going to create a function that returns an int. How old am I? I'm just going to mask this. No, I can't mask it. I was going to cover the screen with my hand, but you guys can't see my hand because it's outside the screen. It doesn't work. And I want to do something clever here, and it's just not going to work for me. So I just type my age, And there we go. I'll hit save, and down here you'll see starting Babel node. We restarted the server, switch back over to my web browser, and now if I run age, look at that, I get 43. If I were to have a birthday tomorrow and turn 143 and hit save, and I hit the run button again, it's returning the proper age. So anytime my age goes up, every time I have a birthday, guess what? I can update my GraphQL server and I can get different results from the client. So let's say I had another birthday and I turned 243 years old. Look how old I am. See, now we're starting to have fun. But it's not that much fun because nobody wants to do that kind of programming. Every time somebody's age goes up, every time they have a birthday, you got to go in and do all that. It would be nice if we had something that would count our age. Well, guess what? This is a JavaScript function. Okay. We could actually define an age variable here. Age. And we can start it at 43. I didn't do that right. Let age, forgot how to create variables, equal 43. And now, every time our JavaScript function runs, I can return age plus equals 100. I'm actually going to put this in curly braces so I don't get too fancy. We'll put curly braces around it because this is a function, an ES6 function. So I'm going to add 100 to my age and return age. So our age starts at 43, and every time we ask for the age, what do you think is going to happen? We start at 143, 243. Look how old I'm getting. I'm getting so old. And what it's doing is it's running this block of code every time I ask for the age function. And this block of code takes age and increments it by 100 because I just had a birthday. Let me write this the long way because that's very advanced. Age equals age plus 100. That's pretty much what that plus equals does. It's shorthand for including age on the right side of the equals here. So we are incrementing the age by 100. Every time I ask for age, it'll start at, why does it start at 143? Oh, because actually, well, we won't get into that, but you get the general gist of it. So I have a query resolver for the type age that's running some code. So this code, this function could be doing anything. Again, this function could be accessing a database and reading data from a database. It could be writing data to a database. It could be making a call to a RESTful API. It could be making a social network call to Tumblr, call to Instagram. I could post pictures. I could retrieve pictures. I can count the amount of likes that I got on, Instagram, or the amount of shares that my latest tweet got on Twitter. I could do anything from the context of this function. I could literally define a tweets function and I didn't type that right, but the tweets function would, let's just say, count my tweets. I would return a count of my tweets. And, I need a comma here because it's supposed to be JavaScript syntax. So now anytime I wanted to create, anytime I wanted to look at tweets, I can refresh the page here. I can look and see what kind of queries are available. And where is tweets? You know why tweets isn't showing up? Guess why tweets aren't showing up? Because I didn't put that in my schema. So we go back to our schema, right? Remember the schema? This guy right here, tweets. And this is an int. And now we can count our tweets, right? Is that going to work? Let's see, is that going to work? We're going into our, yeah, look at that, tweets. And then I can actually autocomplete now. Look how cool this is. And just a little bit of code, I can now count my tweets, right? Right? Wrong! Count tweets is not defined. Look at this. Look at these ugly errors that we get. Count tweets is not defined. What do you mean it's not defined? I did define it. I defined it right here. Where did I define it? Right here. I put it in my schema, right? This is the kind of frustration we have as engineers. Right, you telling me something's not defined. It's clearly defined right here in my schema, right? Well, look a little deeper. Yes, we define it in our schema, but we also have to define it in our query resolver, right? Well, it is. Look, I defined it right here. So why am I getting this error? Read your error messages. Party people, I'm telling you, whenever you get into a frustrating experience, would say, with a program or a programming language, and you get upset because it's telling you something that's broken and it's clearly not broken, I implore you, I encourage you and implore you to read your error messages. What does this error message say is not defined? Does it say tweets is not defined? No, it says count tweets is not defined. Count tweets is not defined. I'm calling a function called count tweets. It's not defined, is it? Do you see the definition of this folder? Command C to copy. We'll go to the top of the file here, and we'll do a Command F, and we will do a Command V to paste count tweets into our search field here, and we will look for the definition of count tweets. I don't see a definition. I see a function call here. This is a function call. It's not a definition. We have to define this function. Let's define this function using old school JavaScript syntax, because we've been doing so much new school stuff. Let's just let's just define a count tweets function. We're defining a count tweets function, and I want to return 5,723 as the number of tweets. Now, this is only a test. Had this been a real application, I would have npm installed some sort of Twitter API package from the npm repository, and I would have read the documentation online on how to use Twitter. I would go to npmjs.com. I would look for a Twitter API. Look at this. There's one right here. And I would read the Twitter API and figure out how to call this Twitter API, how I can use this. I would import it or require it in my app, and then I would do all this crazy stuff and figure out how to actually count my tweets. I'm not going to do that here, but I'm just showing you how easy it is now that I have defined the count tweets function to go back here, and guess what? I get the 5723 tweets here. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will conclude this tutorial. I think I've done enough talking here, enough goofing around. I'm having fun with this, by the way. I hope you guys will appreciate this and get something out of it. Again, this is a basic tutorial on the basic mechanics of GraphQL. What we discussed was how to create your own Express server. So if you're brand new to development, brand new to JavaScript, you're just a front-end engineer, guess what? Now you're full stack. If you follow this through and you've done what I've done, you've implemented a web server. You're responding to RESTful API calls. Believe it or not, this GET is kind of like a REST API call. You've integrated GraphQL by defining a schema, which you imported, and defining a root resolver, which we define right here. And we've cut on the GraphQL Query Explorer, which we use to explore the APIs as we're rapidly developing them. And we've created a couple of functions. We pretended to count some tweets. We've, like I said, we've ran Express and bound it to port 8090. And we're running it here. When you do app listen, I didn't even cover this part, but app listen, after we've defined all of the different things that, Express use. Let me back out some of these changes. I'm going to back out all these changes and go back to the bare minimum of what we had originally. So originally we had this. It looked like this. So we had from the beginning Express, GraphQL HTTP, and our schema. Those are three important pieces. We create an express object by calling the express function we imported. We use our port in 8090, and we ask our express app to listen to port 8090. And once it's connected to that port, it will run this JavaScript function which does a console log, and that console log is telling us which port it's listening to. And that's what you're seeing down here, running server on localhost port. Actually, I should do it like this. This would be a little bit more descriptive. So the actual URL for this server instance would be HTTP localhost. I'm having trouble talking because I've been doing way too much babbling here. But now you can see I should be able to command click on this to follow the link. Look at that. It brings me right up to where I need to be. Look at that. Look at that. See, I can't command click this link because that link isn't really a link. But when I put the HTTP in here, VS Code recognized that. I said, oh, that looks kind of linky. You can command click and follow that. And now I'll open a window in your browser. You don't even have to think about it. So, again, if you're brand new to JavaScript development, brand new and just, front end and HTML JavaScript, guess what? You know enough JavaScript now and enough technology to implement your first web server with GraphQL running in the back end. And we've done a couple of amazing things where we've added different query types and query resolvers. And we put it all together in a matter of a few files here. Package.json, which defines the project, the dependencies that ship with the server, and the dependencies that we're just using for development. We've defined our index file, which is the actual web server. This is the source code, the JavaScript code that runs the web server. Not much here, not much to see here. With one auxiliary or additional schema file that we are importing. So our web server actually reads this in, sucks it in, reads it in, and uses that to define a schema object, which we're passing to GraphQL. And we have a root resolver, which is very basic, and we can be as complicated as we want with any of this technology. Again, I will now leave you to your regularly scheduled hackery. I thank you for checking out my video. I invite you to come back. This is probably going to get posted to my YouTube channel, my personal YouTube account. Feel free to follow me. I'm not asking for followers. I got a bunch of nonsense up there. It's kind of goofy, but if you choose to, it's fine. I'm not looking for numbers. Actually, don't follow me because I got some garbage up there. Some of the stuff is embarrassing, but I'm cool, Follow me, check me out. I will tweet updates to this, post updates on my blog, social networks, whatever. Look for updates in the future. I'm going to try to work through part 2 of what we're going to do when we come through. That's my inner Jay-Z jumping out again. I'm sorry. I do that from time to time. I'm going to try to work through part 2 of this tutorial in the next day or so. And in part 2, I'm going to get into a little bit more of the different types of queries that we can use, and maybe we'll get into some mutations. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I wanted to actually get into the front-end code. So this is just the back-end code. I'm having a bunch of fun with the back-end because I started life as a back-end developer. Quiet as kept. I'm a front-end guy now, but I'm actually full stack. But I get kind of crazy with the back-end. But we're going to, part 2 of this tutorial, I'm going to try to pull in a static. Yeah, that's where it gets actually fun and creative, because I'm going to pull in a static HTML file that was developed by another engineer that I found on CodePen. And I'm going to slice that up as a React application in a real hackish way. And we'll put some React.js on top of a static HTML file, and we will create our Facebox GQL social network. Stay tuned for part 2. Thank you.